Okay, so you want to own a gun range. Build some lanes, sell memberships, rent guns to first timers, sell ammo and gear on the way out. A hobby that pays for itself.
An industry the NSSF says has grown 379% since 2008 into an $80 billion economic footprint. Loyal customers, recurring memberships, a built-in retail counter.
That is the dream, and it is not entirely wrong. Here's what it doesn't tell you. The single biggest threat to your business isn't a bad location or slow membership growth. It's an invisible substance that's been quietly accumulating in your walls, your ventilation ducts, and your soil since the day you opened. And the bill for it can arrive decades later, all at once. Let's start with what it costs to open one. A high-quality, 2-lane static indoor range runs $230,000 to $500,000, according to industry range builders. But that's the small end. A mid-sized, 10-lane, 15,000-square-foot commercial facility typically runs $1.5 to $3 million for construction and equipment alone, before land. Land acquisition alone can add another $200,000 to over $1 million, depending on the market. Add specialized shooting range equipment like bullet traps and target retrieval systems, another $300,000 to $1 million. Add ventilation and HVAC, one of the single largest line items, at $200,000 to $750,000. Because unlike almost any other retail build-out, you're not just heating and cooling a room, you're engineering an airborne lead containment system. All in, a serious commercial range with amenities can run anywhere from $550,000 for a bare-bones setup to over $5 million for a large, modern facility. And before you serve a single customer, you need licenses and permits specific to firearms retail, typically $5,000 to $25,000, plus initial inventory of rental firearms, ammunition, targets, and protective gear, running $50,000 to $275,000 or more. Here's the part almost nobody budgets for going in, and it's the one that eventually determines whether your range survives. Every single round fired downrange deposits lead, as vapor, as dust, as fragments in the bullet trap. Indoor ranges need continuous, purpose-built air filtration just to keep lead dust below OSHA exposure limits. And that system isn't a one-time purchase. It's an ongoing operating cost. When Whatcom County's Plantation Rifle Range needed its 40-year-old HVAC system rebuilt, the fix alone ran $1.68 million, and that was separate from the outdoor range's lead cleanup, which started at an estimated $1 million and has since climbed to $13.8 million, as testing revealed the true scale of decades of accumulated contamination. In Washington state, regulators once described an indoor range called Champion Arms as the worst case of lead exposure they had ever documented, with surface lead dust tested at over 115 times safe levels on a soda machine in the lobby. A maintenance worker who lived on site needed chelation therapy, costing up to $3,800 a month for over 2 years to clear the lead from his body. Outdoor ranges face the same problem in a different form. San Francisco is spending $22 million cleaning up a former range site on the shores of a lake. A California Parks District saw its lead cleanup estimate balloon from an initial $1.6 million to as much as $20 million once a full environmental assessment was done. This is the trap sitting underneath the entire business. Lead contamination doesn't show up on your books as a liability the day you open. It accumulates silently for years, sometimes decades, and the eventual bill has nothing to do with how well you ran the range day to day. Once you're open and compliant, the daily operating costs stack up the way any retail business does, just with a firearms-specific twist. Insurance is non-negotiable and expensive, given the inherent liability, covering customer injury, property damage, and firearm-specific risk,
that most general carriers price at a premium. Staff need firearms training certifications on top of normal retail skills. Lead abatement contractors need to be brought in regularly, not as an emergency measure, but as routine maintenance. And choosing a cut-rate contractor is its own risk, since a contractor who cuts corners and later goes bankrupt under OSHA fines leaves the range owner holding the liability. Range equipment like target retrieval systems and bullet traps need continuous calibration and servicing. None of this is optional, and none of it scales down just because a slow month brought in fewer customers. Now the revenue side, and this is genuinely where a well-run range can work. The core layer is lane time, pay-per-visit or membership-based access to shoot. Annual memberships typically run $300 to $1,000, with monthly options around $25 to $100. A modest range with 500 members at $40 a month alone generates $240,000 a year in predictable recurring revenue, the kind of stable base that makes the rest of the business plannable. On top of that sits retail, ammunition, targets, eye and ear protection, firearms, accessories, and rental fees for customers who don't own a gun yet. Industry data shows members spend 30 to 50% more per visit than non-members on these ancillary purchases, which is why range owners push membership so aggressively, even at a discount. A third layer is training and certification classes, concealed carry courses, basic safety classes, and instructor-led sessions, which carry high margins because the primary cost is instructor time, not equipment. A well-run range in a good location can post a strong, entirely legitimate business. Membership dues covering fixed costs, retail and training covering the margin. Here's the disaster case study, and it's a slow one rather than a dramatic one, which is exactly why it catches owners off guard. The Plantation Rifle Range near Bellingham, Washington, operated for 50 years without ever conducting a formal lead cleanup or mitigation program. Decades of spent ammunition accumulated in the soil, and a creek running through the property, eventually feeding into a tributary of a nearby lake. In November 2022, the range was forced to close entirely due to the hazardous waste finally being flagged. The indoor range had separately closed the year before because its 40-year-old HVAC system had failed roughly a decade earlier, meaning lead dust had been quietly building up inside the building the entire time no one was actively addressing it. When the county finally commissioned a full environmental assessment, the cleanup estimate started at roughly $1 million, then rose to $6.5 million, then doubled again to $13.8 million as testing revealed just how deep and widespread the contamination actually was. The range had been popular and functional for half a century. Nothing about its day-to-day operation looked unusual. The debt wasn't a bad quarter or a lawsuit from one angry customer. It was 50 years of an invisible byproduct nobody had been pricing into the business, arriving all at once as a bill nearly 30 times larger than the first estimate. Let's run the numbers on two scenarios. Optimistic case, you open a 10-lane commercial range for $2.5 million all in. Build membership to 800 members within 3 years at $40 a month, generating $384,000 a year in dues alone, plus retail and training revenue of roughly $300,000 for total revenue near $684,000 against operation costs, staff, insurance, utilities, and routine lead abatement of around $450,000. That leaves close to $234,000 a year in profit, a genuinely solid return on a well-located, well-run facility with disciplined lead management built into daily operations from day one. Realistic case, the same range, same membership numbers, but the previous owner deferred proper lead abatement for years to save money, a common shortcut in this industry. A routine inspection
prompted by a complaint or a state audit, uncovers contamination, requiring a full remediation. Even a modest cleanup on an indoor facility can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, and if soil or groundwater is involved, into the millions, arriving as a single unbudgeted liability that can erase years of accumulated profit in one stroke. Exactly what happened at Plantation, and at ranges across the country that regulators have flagged with an 86% violation rate among those inspected. So if you decide to own a gun range, understand what you're actually buying. You're not buying a shooting facility. You're buying a recurring membership business sitting directly on top of an accumulating environmental liability that grows heavier every single day the range operates, whether anyone notices or not.
Manage the lead properly from day one, and this can be a genuinely profitable, loyal customer business.
Defer it the way most ranges historically have, and you're not saving money. You're just letting someone else, sometimes a future owner, sometimes a taxpayer, discover the real price later.